Welcome to a CNBC Africa panel special on changing habits in the e-commerce sector and looking at how consumer behavior has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Arnold Kwizera. I'll be coming to you from our studios here in Kigali. Now, in the conversation today, just to give it a little bit of context now, with many countries having to shut down due to lockdowns and curfews as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact on the movement seem to present an opportunity for businesses in the e-commerce space. Now, a year on, with the gradual reopenings happening, could this have a lasting impact on consumer behavior? Now, joining us on this panel is a panel of experts, and allow me to introduce it. I will start with Madam Aisetu Sanogo. She's the managing director at Kasha. We also have Mr. Ron Kawamara, who is the Jumia Uganda CEO, and Mr. Albert Munyavjingo, who is the co-founder and CEO of Vuba Vuba Africa Limited. Now, if you want to be part of this conversation, tweet us at CNBC Africa, or you could tag me directly at The Real Quizzer. Now, quickly to dive into this conversation, I want to start with you, Madam Sanogo. Consumer behavior over the past, let's say, 12 to 14 months has largely changed. How has that been in effect when it came to the operations of Kasha?
Thank you, Arnold. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here at CNBC. I would say COVID definitely affected most businesses during the last 12 months, but definitely not the e-commerce business as negatively as the others. For example, Kasha Rwanda, we sell hygiene and pharma products, and including COVID protection products. And due to that, we're one of the services allowed to work during the COVID pandemic. And I would say in the last 12 years, we literally had a growth of 700%. So I would say the pandemic had an effect to us, which wasn't that negative, but instead we saw largely a growth. And this was mostly due to regulation around COVID, let's say social distancing regulation that they had put on the government, and whereby you do not need to go to shops, you do not travel, but instead you reach e-commerce companies. So, for example, we have a network of agents that we use who are women, reach rural areas. These women income stayed on due to the pandemic. And not only that, it also increased because the demand was so high and they could see their income increasing every month to the point that now we literally increased the network of agents to 400%.
Albert, I want to bring you into the conversation. Yours was more or less a new company, born just before the pandemic, tapping into a gap that had been left by a previous player. How did the pandemic impact you?
Thank you very much, Arnold. My pleasure to be on this panel. So if I look at it in two angles, I mean, we had the first COVID case in Rwanda back in March 2020. And that was 2 months after we had launched our operations in the country. So this has, came in as a booster in terms of, new customers acquisition. Because if you compare numbers from, Feb 2020, and then probably April 2020 when, we had COVID in Rwanda and was in total lockdown, where only essential services were allowed to operate. You've seen a growth of closer to, 98% in less than 2 months. So I look at this as, and most of this big part was in terms of new customers acquisition, because one of the challenges we're facing, after launching was acquiring new customers. I believe as any other sector or any other business in the e-commerce industry, the customer acquisition channel efforts actually huge than retaining customers, especially if you have strong operations. So say the new customers we were acquiring from Jan and Feb. If I compare this to March and April, in terms of new customers, this literally grew more than 250%. So this one of the advantages where e-commerce in Rwanda facing the pandemic was growth in terms of new customers and in terms of transactions, as well as purchasing behaviors. You could see that when we launched, people were mostly ordering, cooked food from restaurants. Right after when we were under total lockdown, then the behavior actually not really changed, but added on to people ordering from supermarkets, from groceries, to drinks, and as Kasha does as well, on the COVID-19 prevention kits, and literally everything grew in terms of new services and demand from customers.
Thank you all, but I want to bring Ron into the conversation. CEO of a company that its parent company seemed to be struggling leading up to the pandemic. It seems to differ for you in that market. Why was it so different for you?
Well, I think I wouldn't say that we were struggling. I think we've had a fantastic 2020 and we have a fantastic 2021. I think COVID-19 indeed was a huge disruption for the economy. I think junior in all our markets were already set to meet such challenges. We had a big ecosystem of logistics across the countries we operate, a big ecosystem of warehouses. And so we saw that when the public was not able to move, online was a natural channel for people to go to. We also saw that customers for the first time ranked safety well above or as good as brand and as good as price in deciding what to purchase. And even when we saw a shift online as well, there was a shift in terms of what customers were buying. And we see that trend continues to today. Customers buying mainly groceries, essentials for the home, less about electronics. We also see that the kinds of people who are coming online are different. These are people who were in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns, smaller towns, not the major cities. And so we saw that the disruption affected those areas much more aggressively. But also we saw new trends in terms of who was selling online. Historically, it's been the big brands. Historically, we've seen the electronics sector dominate online trade. But during COVID and subsequently since then, we've seen the informal sector go online, small traders. We've seen also the brands who had stayed away from online embracing technology. We've seen a huge ecosystem of services built around this e-commerce boom. Logistics companies have been started up to boost the e-commerce trend. And so the whole ecosystem, fintech as well, has benefited. So it's not that people have used e-commerce or online business during COVID. We also see that those who came during this period of time are happy. They're coming back. They're excited. So that bodes very well for the future of e-commerce because those who have come are quite excited. The ecosystem is booming, as I would say, logistics, fintech space, payment solutions. And so we're yet to see how long these trends last. But for now, we see that there's this big shift. And one trend as well that for me is key to note is that we see there's also higher demand for local products, which is great for the local economies. The supply chain disruption, global supply chain disruption, has made a lot of the imports much more expensive. So we see that people, especially here in Uganda and many other countries as well, prefer to buy cheaper, locally made products. And those are some of the good, nice trends that are coming out of this epidemic.
Thank you, Ron. Ron, I want to stay with you there. Legislation has been a major hindrance for majority of startups or e-commerce-based businesses on the continent. Did the pandemic help align or did it exacerbate these fears?
Well, I think number one, before COVID-19, a lot of the online companies struggled with trust. Trust from the consumers, trust from the big brands, trust even from the regulators. But for the first time since e-commerce started in Africa, we saw that e-commerce became the safer option, that governments were encouraging people to shop online, customers preferred to stay home and stay safe. And so there was a big boost in trust of online transactions. So that's a good thing. And also, for the first time, government really understood the value of technology, the value of e-commerce companies, One, in incorporating more people, especially the informal sector, people in tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 towns into the economy. And obviously being able to manage a pandemic, so online distribution was very important. So from the government side, we've seen a little bit of more trust. And my hope is that this is translated into real investment in the sector, into real understanding, because at the end of the day, for many of the countries where Jumia operates, the regulations have been behind the innovation. And Jumia has been a good partner with the governments to make sure that we have sensible regulations. Our internal standards have been much higher than the government's. And so my hope is that this impact, this growth that's coming from e-commerce is enabled, that we don't create barriers. Rather, we invest more into it. We apply sensible regulations into it. And from what I see is that that's the trend.
Madam Isaitu, I want to bring you back into the conversation. Ron talks about trust being key. Your business banks on privacy and trust, and with the cybersecurity attacks that have also gone up. How have you been able to build trust in your line of work?
Trust wasn't that easy to be made in Kasha. Before, it was really hard for someone to trust that you bring a product to them. But during the pandemic, that's when we saw people trusting more the products. And one thing I've realized is the more they trust the product is quality, they get to receive it. I mean, there are two segments of customers, I would say. The lower income community, their trust is mostly through someone. It's not just I will trust and order something and it will just come. That's why we had to create the network of agents whereby they could trust at least that person who's bringing the product because it's someone in their community. Trust is a very serious thing, but the more, for the last 12 years, we've seen that trust grow so much because once they started purchasing the product, they learned that, we can actually trust this company and we can actually get the product more and more and more. Like here, I'm happy that there are more regulation being put around that and more regulations on, for example, health products, what health products should come to you and how do we trust that product is genuine? How do we trust that product is from the pharmacy? And there are more regulation how we can get that done. And the more the regulations are put in place, the more the trust is being is growing between us and the customers. So I would say that for now, we have quite a number of people. Actually, like I said, the growth is so huge that we understand that they trust and they keep on coming back. And especially in the sector of health, the pharma product that we provide at Kasha, that's where we see a huge, massive return in customers who trust this company, who trust this area of business and come back always to get the same product. So I would say the trust is really grown in the last 12 months, which we are very happy about.
I want to stay with you, Isaitu. I want you to give us examples of what you as Kasha, in terms of either business model or marketing plan or marketing model that you are doing to ensure that, one, your consumers not only return, but you also get new consumers on board because you're dealing with health products. And majority of the people, here I'm just looking at it from a very conservative perspective of where people shy away from buying things like condoms in pharmacies. Someone will wait for 10 people to go until they're the last person for them to acquire condoms. So for them to go ahead and call a stranger, in this case, a company like Kasha, to order those online, and bring them to their home. How do you go about building? What have you done in particular to build that trust?
Yes, I'll add that it's confidentiality part of Kasha. Kasha is, we work in confidentiality. And this is whereby between me and the person taking the order, nobody else knows what's in that box. And this was started because of the stigma behind women, like you say, or men going to get a condom, or women going to get a pad or a service. I mean, you cannot go maybe at a health center and ask for something because maybe it's your uncle working there. So that's why we brought this confidentiality part of Kasha, whereby anything you're getting from Kasha is confidential. So we, especially women really love confidentiality because they get to open up. We've conducted so many focus groups to understand the customers, and one part that keeps on coming back is the confidentiality part. especially in rural community. They keep telling you there are certain topics we cannot talk about, but I'm happy to call Kasha and talk to a doctor and who can tell me how to proceed with something instead of going to maybe the health facility where there's my uncle working there. So I would say for Kasha, it was mostly the confidentiality part whereby they started trusting us, and obviously customer service has to be good and also the quality of the product.
Albert, I want to bring you back into the conversation, and it's a question I asked Ron earlier around legislation. Case in point, there was that proposal by Rura regarding a certain percentage to be a certain percentage of tax to be added to already existing taxes being paid by e-commerce platforms. Such forms of legislation tend to affect new players like yourself. How has legislation caught up with the likes of Vuavua?
Well, thank you for bringing this back, Arnold. I think first I'll look at it in a way that Ron mentioned. It had been quite some time where e-commerce has been looked at as a very tiny or small sector that is actually not playing a huge role in the economy of our countries, as most specifically in Rwanda. But of course, within the pandemic, that's when we managed to position ourselves as frontline workers and actually not only doing deliveries, but actually helping reduce the spread of the COVID-19. So with this, of course, we saw a good move from the government supporting different initiatives, allowing us to keep delivering in a pandemic. We've seen the sector growing from as few as 3 e-commerce platforms delivering to as many as 80 to 90 as we speak now. So I think that was one of the approaches where the government looked at it and felt a good need to regulate this because like in any other sector, of course, we look at regulations as a support to grow. Of course, with this, the new draft Rura had released about, we had a discussion around the table with all the e-commerce players, with Rura and the other institutions involved, to make them understand that regulations we're really not against regulations, but just we're looking at the regulations which are going to support the consumers and us, the sellers as well, e-commerce platforms to keep striving with this hard time for everyone. So we had discussion and raised a few points that we thought were very heavy to ourselves, and at the end of the day could impact the consumers as well, and the adoption of e-commerce. A few regulations were a fixed amount to be paid before you actually start even operating. As we know, many e-commerces starting in Rwanda are ideas that come to a reality. And before you speak to investors, before you speak to anyone else, you've got to revive the idea and make it work. So a licensing fee of $3,000 to be paid up front. That was a big barrier to all of us, and we were suggesting different suggestions, including having installments and among others. So I think regulations themselves are not bad, but they should be looked at a way, one, based on numbers. If being able to explain the figure you're coming up with, you back it with numbers, and of course let the stakeholders as well be part of it. And here I will thank Rura specifically and the government of Rwanda that have heard us and giving them reasons that these could be a barrier to the adoption of the e-commerce, and I believe they're still revising these regulations in a proper way.
Very detailed there from you, Albert. Glad that you were listened to. Ron, I want to bring you into the conversation now. When you see most of e-commerce services and where they've been adopted, it's largely in the major capital cities, the likes of Kampala, the likes of Nairobi, Kigali, Lagos, Accra, Abuja. That, in a way, has made it confined. Your market base and market growth has been confined. Now, one is the infrastructure. Is there the right infrastructure on the continent to ensure that companies like yours are not only confined to towns, but also expand out into what are termed as secondary cities? And if not, what can be done better?
Thank you for that question. Indeed, there's a lot of role government should play, as Albert was explaining, and this role should not just be about regulation. Just to explain better, what I see in Kenya, for example, the digital tax, what I see what's being discussed in Rwanda, what's being discussed in other countries is that governments have not fully understood the difference of locally based e-commerce platforms versus the big giants like Google and Facebook. These companies, Jumia or Vuba and many other players in the market, have local entities who pay taxes, who pay payroll taxes. They do pay corporate taxes, income tax. They remit VAT. And so they're paying taxes like any other business. Now, compare that with Facebook or Google or YouTube, who don't have a legal entity, do not pay any income tax, do not pay any corporate tax, do not pay any VAT remittance. And so we need to separate the fact that government is looking at e-commerce as a place that's untaxed. The reality is that it's taxed, and we need to make sure we look at the giants who are taking revenues out of the countries that we operate in Africa, and make sure that they pay their share. But adding on a flat digital tax or whatever you want to call it is a big regressive move that is going to hinder innovation and is going to take us backwards. In terms of the outside the major cities, we see that there's huge growth and huge opportunity in the smaller towns. For Jumia, across our countries, more than 30% of our businesses are not happening in the major cities. So that's close to 35%. In Uganda, it's about 30%. In other countries, well above 35, 40%. And so we see that there's a high purchasing power, and the value proposition for customers who are staying in smaller towns is much bigger than if you live in a big town. You stay in Kampala, or you live in Lagos, or you're in Kigali, there's opportunity for you to access retail. You can go to the big giants and buy these products at times. But if you live in smaller towns, you have no access to good retail. Where there's access to pricing is quite high. There's no protections of warranty, returns. And so our proposition and the proposition of Jumia and the other tech companies is much stronger in the rural areas. So we see that this is going to be a big opportunity. But to be able to harness this, we need strong investment, internet availability in these areas. The price of internet is still quite high. Logistics is very expensive because the road network is not there. And then the third part is that the payment solutions, the banking percentage of the population is still quite small. So it's very expensive to collect cash and remit. So we hope that as more people get banked, as the logistics and transport infrastructure improves, that we'll see a bigger share coming from these areas. Because for many of the African countries, the majority of people live in rural areas. They don't live in major towns. So we're confident that with government action, we can really see a huge boost in those areas.
Very detailed there. From your Albert's closing remarks, what does the future look like for this sector in 2021?
Thank you. Indeed, the future is quite promising. As I was looking at the numbers from, way back when we were still in total lockdown in Kigali and the whole city, we managed to grow to closer to 99%. And if I compare that March of, April to, March 2021, where we are sort of free to move around, we've literally grew as well from, percentage of around 15%. So this speak to me and then the rest of the players in this ground that, COVID really helped us to acquire new customers and then build trust, as Ron stated. And then this is literally our time to, make sure that we don't overpromise and then under-deliver. This is the right time to make sure that we serve this community pretty well. So 2021, way forward, I believe the trend will just keep growing and go higher because consumers have understood that this is a true value. This is not a tier one customer service, but it's actually a service to everyone using the different platforms. Thank you.
Very optimistic there from Albert. Ron, your closing remarks. What does the future look like from an investor's perspective?
Well, I think that COVID has shown that countries, companies that have been exposed or have an advanced use of technology have been more resilient than other companies. In other countries, they were not. And so the only way we build resilience in our economies, the only way we build resilience in our businesses is by investing in technology, is by encouraging innovation and e-commerce. And so my expectation is that governments have learned, entrepreneurs have seen the opportunity, and so we should expect more companies to continue to be developed, like Vuba Vuba in Rwanda, like Jumia has done. This also will be attract investment. We've seen many companies here in Uganda. Tugende has been able to raise millions of dollars to continue to expand across East Africa. Jumia continues to grow quite aggressively across the continent. So we see that there's more trust even on the investment side. Now, we have to be aware that these are not very easy times for all African economies because the commodity prices have dropped. And so it will be, the e-commerce sector is also within the overall economy of our countries. And so if the economy slows down, it's going to be very difficult for e-commerce to grow in a vacuum. So our hope is that our countries get back on track, that COVID-19 is contained with vaccinations. And when that is done, the future is great. E-commerce is really having a great opportunity to expand and change lives in Africa.
Thank you, Ron. And Madam Sanogo, my producers will kill me with this, but should we expect Kasha IPO or Kasha listing on any of the regional bourses anytime soon?
We are already in Kasha, Kenya, as you know. Yes, we'll be expanding somewhere else by the end of the year, probably or next year. But yeah, we'll be in more places soon. Our aim is to reach so many women in Africa, as you know. And just to give another closing remark is, with the mutation of the virus, I'd say that COVID might be the norm. So most people will come from offline to online most of the time. And the more the e-commerce company grows, this positions the e-commerce companies as the place for investors. So investing in the region will be mostly based on the e-commerce companies in this downturn. So I encourage everyone to keep pushing and keep saying, and we've seen that we can actually make it. And customers have embraced it, citizens have embraced it, and we keep safe and we keep with all the COVID regulation around it and fighting the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Madam Sanogo. Unfortunately, we have to leave this conversation there. That was Aisetu Sanogo, the Managing Director at Kasha. She was also joined by Mr. Ron Kawamara, he's the Jumia Uganda CEO, and Mr. Albert Munyabujingo, the co-founder and CEO of Vuba Vuba Africa Limited. Our conversation today was on consumer behavior in the e-commerce sector as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if you want to be part of this conversation, tweet us at CNBC Africa, or you could tag me directly at The Real Quizzer. Have a great day.